Okay, in this exercise, we're going to walk through what happens when you need to create an image or a visual to count, you know, how many of how much. So when we have two variables in this case, and our independent variable is quantitative, and our other variables are quantitative, how do we count that? Well, one of the most common ways, and one of the easy ways here, it's called the histogram. And so all the histogram does, to simply review, is that it shows a distribution, or the distribution of material, or in this case, we're going to, in our example, we're going to be looking at garbage collection again, right? So histograms will show you the frequency distribution, how often each value in a set of data occurs over that set of data. So it sounds complicated. It's actually pretty simple. And we're going to use the same garbage collection data set and follow along with your book. So in this case, the question we're trying to answer is very simply, how many community districts yielded particular amounts of refuse? So I want to see how many community districts, right? So that's a count, yielded certain amounts of refuse, a distribution of refuse. So, okay. So how we do this first is we connect to our data. And so if we go back, I had mine in a text file, a CSV file. So I go here and back to my Department of Sanitation of New York, my monthly tonnage data, and I open. And so now I've connected back to my data set again. Okay, very good. And now I go back to sheet 1. Okay, so in sheet 1, I now have my blank canvas area. And so what I'm trying to do is create a visualization that shows this distribution. The nice part about Tableau is it actually has some help for you to help you get started and move as rapidly as possible. And so we know we're looking to create a histogram because we know that what we're asking for in our question. So let's say I know I need to start with refuse tons collected. So go down here to refuse tons collected and I click on it in the measures. Now if I go to show me, what we'll see is we have horizontal bars, stacked bars, side-by-side bars, all these kinds of things that we're looking for. Histogram right here. Notice we need one measure. And so you see that histogram? So we just click on the histogram, and what Tableau has done is actually created our histogram for us. Now we're using more updated data than the data set in your book, so it's not going to look exactly the same. So we have this lovely tool here at our disposal. And so what Tableau has done is you'll also notice here, refuse collected bin. And so what it's done is created bins. And so each one of these columns is a bin. Now, if we want to follow along with the example in our book, we know the month they were looking at, right? The month in particular they were focusing on was September of 2011. So this shows the overall count of refuse tons collected per community district, right, over the entire data set. So all of these years. And so what it shows you is that there's 0 refuse tons collected, so there have been 27 times that's happened, right, in districts. We see here 97, and what we see is greater frequency here, right? The biggest pocket is in here, and we have some outliers here and here. But we want to narrow this down to a particular month. And so the easy way to do that is we start and we look for the date, right? So we look for date or month, and here we have month. So we can drag month to filters, and notice here we can choose which month, and in this case what we're looking for is September of 2011. So we choose 9/2011 and select OK. And so now we have a histogram that shows the refuse tons collected and the number of districts collecting roughly that amount. We also see some blanks in here. These blanks indicate that this amount was not collected. So this distribution skips a few here. Once again, we have our vertical bars, and these bars are called bins, and their width and their size, their width is their bin size. And so you can adjust bin size, and you can see how much a bin is sized at here. So you see 1092, 1248, and so we can always adjust the bin size, but we have to be very cautious as to how we do it. If we want to, we go to where it says refuse tons collected and right click on it, and then we can go to edit, and we'll see here the size of bins is 156. Okay, but let's say we want something different. Let's say we wanted 1,000 there. Now, what this has done is it's shrunk the number of bars, and it's changed the scale. So we kind of wanted to dial in more specifically on that distribution. We're looking for something a little more exacting. And so what we have to be careful of is using binning as a way of warping our data. Because here, what it's measuring is, right, so we have 5 in the 1000s, right, 15 there in the 2, 3s, and so on, right? But we had way more valuable information here. So let's undo that. It also hides the fact that there were, 1 district here, right, 4 districts there. So there's some important variation we need to see in this distribution. We also need to see those areas where there were blanks. And so if you were to change this bin, right, so let's say edit, what does 500 do? And you're going to need to really play with this to get a consistent and good visualization. Right? Your book compares this to Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? Too much, too little, just right. You have to watch out for histograms that you make in Tableau. So if we create one with, with bins here, let's say we made bins that were sized at 100 tons. So we edit, we go to 156, we go to 100, right? Some intervals are missing, right? So here's our first bar is for 1200, right? There's our second bar, 1300. The third bar should be here, but there's no bar there. It's for over here, the 1600 marker. So there aren't any community districts that produce those, so that's why those things are blank. Now, your book warns you that Tableau will automatically fill those bars in, and you need to be careful of that depending on your bin sizes, and will cover up these missing bars, and that can warp your data. So the newest version of Tableau doesn't have that, so you don't have to worry so much about that. And so in this, we have our histogram. And so this is very accurate. This is not necessarily the visualization I would use, but it's important to make sure your visualization is first accurate. Okay, so now that we have an accurate presentation of these data, we want to make this look visually appealing without warping our sensibilities. So I think we're happy with our bin structure. So what we have set here, if we go back to edit to remind us, is that we've sized our bins at 100. So each bin here, the width represents 100. Okay? But now what we need to do is make this look more presentable and more like a standard distribution that people can read. And so here, what we'll want to do is use our friends here in the marks box. So if we go into the marks box and we click on the size card here, right? And we click on the size card and we move this slider manual, and we move the slider all the way here. Okay. We start to get something, and then we can go to color, and we can change this to gray, and it starts to look a little bit better. Now we can try fixing our binning a little bit more. And let's see if we go to binning and edit, and maybe we go to 200 for our bin sizes. Maybe if we go here, okay, and then try our size again. Okay, how about here? You're going to keep playing with this until you get it just right. A little bit better, a little bit more looking like a distribution, and maybe keep editing. And how about 500? Okay, so now what we just need to do is go back to here, fixed. And so we've set the binning there, and what we see is a much better readable distribution. We can play around with the color some more. Like, we can look at the border effects and maybe give it a black border. How's that? And then and here we have our histogram. So in this histogram, what do we see represented? Well, here's our refuse tons collected, and that's the distribution of the pounds, right? The refuse tons collected. And here shows the number of community districts. And we know that the bins here, each bin, and we set our bin size at 500. So one of the other things I like to do is actually inform, make sure everyone knows if I have a visual. And so it's kind of nice to have something that tells people this is what each bin is 500, because you should be able to see it here, but it's always good to remind. I always think it's good to remind. So I want to make sure my data is captioned. So instead of just dropping a text box in here, first I want to name my sheet. Oh, that's frustrating. Here we go. And on this, we'll name it refuse tons collected, Department of Sanitation, New York. in September 2011, right? And what we wanted to do is say that this is by community district. There you go. Put that title in. Now, we also want to make sure we inform people about the binning, so I can just go here. So this tool, the show hide cards, I can go to the caption card. And notice the caption is already automatically generated, right? The trend count of refuse tons collected for refuse tons collected bin. It's filtered on month, which keeps 2011 9. And what I want to add in the caption is I open it up and say each bin equals 500 tons. Okay, and we'll see that here. So I have my image, I have my caption, and here we go. So now I can save this image, right? Just as we always do, I go to my export in the worksheet, and I go to image, and I go to my refuse tons, and I want these things, the title, the view, the caption, and I save it, and say histogram refuse tons. I save it on my desktop. I'm saving it as a PNG. And so now, if I was to go to here, my desktop, and here, what we see is the image. Each bin is 500 tons, and we have this easily made histogram. So, in this case, once again, what is this saying? 2 community districts. In this collection, this 500 ton range between 1,000 and 1,500 tons, 2 community districts. Right? Here, between 1,500 and 2,000, 3 community districts, and so on. And so we have an easy visualization here. But remember, we started with being as precise and exact as possible, and then we could play with the visualization. It's really important to make sure that your data is accurately reflected, and then as you need to make adjustments to make that visual more readable, right, that's when you can make those adjustments. In our next lesson, we'll talk again about making sure you don't lie with numbers. And in your visualizations, it's very easy to go off into outer space sometimes. You make things so pretty you actually warp or misrepresent the data set you were there to generate a visual for. And so we have some simple rules we can follow in generating our visualizations that don't just follow the aesthetics required, but also make sure we don't misrepresent the data we have.